Welcome. I'm so pleased to have you here for the 4th Annual Hubbard Lecture, First Peoples of the Plains. I am Susan Weller, Director of the University of Nebraska State Museum, and it's just so wonderful to welcome all of you here tonight. We are so very grateful to Dr. Ann Hubbard and to the Claire M. Hubbard Foundation for the generous endowment given to the State Museum that supports this lecture series. And the purpose of this lecture is to help advance the understanding and appreciation of the cultural heritage of the First Peoples of the Plains. I would now like to ask Ann to step forward and receive a small token of our appreciation and thanks. Ann? You're here, good. I have to have an assistant with my crutches. And there you go. Would you like to say a few words? Ann, if you'd like to say a few words.
Somewhere, well, anyway, I know where it was, but anyway, I developed a deep interest and curiosity of indigenous peoples really when I was in college here at University of Nebraska. When I moved back here, it was about the time they were getting ready to remodel the First People of the Plains exhibit. So I wanted to be involved in that because it had meant so much to me in the way, anyway, in what has been interesting to me. And I wanted to have this lectureship to go along with it so that people knew that Native Americans were alive and doing really interesting things and lots of different things. So as a philanthropist, I think the best thing that I get out of it is I've gotten to meet incredible people in the Native American community, like I said, doing many things. And the people that have been the lecturers some of them have become friends. So it's that circle of life that what you give, you get back way more. I had a chance to be with Robin here today, and as in my part-time, I'm an environmentalist in my spare time. So what she's going to speak to, what I heard her speak about today really spoke to my heart. So I look forward to hearing what she's saying today.
Yep, thank you. Oh, and thank you, Ann. You know, this lecture series would not be successful without our community partners, and I wish to thank Judy Gayesh-Gabosh, the Executive Director of the Nebraska Commission on Indian Affairs, and Charlie Foster, the Director of the Office of Academic Success and Intercultural Services, for co-sponsoring some associated events with Robin Kimmerer's visit to us. I also wish to give a special thanks to our host tonight, the Center for the Great Plains and Great Plains Art Museum. We sincerely thank them for offering this beautiful venue for our lecture and reception. Thank you, Rick, for having us come to your house. You know, each year the Hubbard Lecture Committee consists of many people from across Lincoln to select the annual speaker, and I ask that committee members now rise and be recognized. So please, committee members, Shirley, Judy, others, thank you. And our State Museum benefits from the wisdom and support of its Friends Board. I'd like to ask our Museum Board Chair, Art Ziegelbaum, to rise, our president, and remain standing, while other members of the Museum Board now join him. Please, friends of the Museum Board, thank you so much for all you do for us. It's now my pleasure to ask Rick Edwards to step forward to the podium and make a few remarks. Rick?
Thank you, Susan, and welcome to all of you. We're delighted to have you here in the Center for Great Plains Studies. I want to start by thanking Susan and the State Museum, the Friends, and the other folks who have been involved in helping us establish this partnership. This is a great combination. Our interests here in the center mesh nicely with what the State Museum is doing, and especially with this lecture. And of course, thank you to Ann Hubbard and the Hubbard Foundation and to our other partners, Judy Gosh-Bagosh and others who have worked on this. I might just say a couple of words about the center. First of all, we're glad that you moved over here after doing your rehearsals in the Sheldon, moved to the main stage here at the Center for Great Plains Studies. The center, if you don't know about the center, is in this building, but we have fellows on all 4 of the Nebraska campuses and have programs and activities and relate to all 4 of the campuses. Our mission is to promote understanding of and appreciation for the people, cultures, and natural environment of the Great Plains. 2 of the priorities that we currently stress right now in our own work have to do with the past, present, and future of Native Americans in the Great Plains and preserving the biodiversity of the Great Plains. So you can see that the first time you've come to the center with this speaker is a wonderful match for us. I want to thank the staffs of the museum and of the center for working together to bring this event to its realization. The first time you partner with somebody and they have their way of doing things and we have our ways, you never quite know how it's going to go, but this in fact has been a wonderful partnership and we really appreciate working with you. I hope you've had a chance to look around at the art in this room and in the lower level. On this level we have, as I think the slides said, our 3rd Contemporary Indigeneity exhibition. We do this on a biennial basis, and we feel like this is our best exhibition yet. So I hope you have a chance to enjoy the art. Again, welcome to the Center for Great Plains Studies. We're delighted to have you here. Thanks, Susan.
I'm now pleased to introduce our featured speaker, Dr. Robin Kimmerer. She is a professor of environmental and forest biology at the State University of New York College of Environmental Science and Forestry, the director of the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment at SUNY, and part of her work is to provide greater access for Native peoples to study environmental science. Robin is an enrolled member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, and she combines her heritage with her scientific and environmental passions. She will be talking tonight about traditional ecological knowledge, TEK, and I don't want to steal her thunder, but I do want to say that TEK is receiving more and more recognition across the greater scientific community. Robin is a pioneer in the best sense. She crosses disciplines and she moves gracefully from erudite articles on mosses to inspiring books like Gathering Moss, A Natural and Cultural History of Mosses, which won the John Burroughs Medal. And I know she has just recently published Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants. She's received many awards and recognition for her impactful teachings and writings. As a fellow biologist, I feel truly honored to have her here tonight, and I'm so looking forward to learning more about how we can bring our own personal cultural traditions, our humanity, into our work as scientists. So Robin, thank you so much. The podium is yours, and I want to remind everyone, cell phones silenced, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Get organized here. Miigwech, thank you so much for that really warm welcome. Thank you, Dr. Hubbard, for your support of this important series of making visible and honoring these ways and scholars who are often overlooked. So thank you very much for that. And thank you all for being here. I'm really honored. It's been a wonderful visit, a very warm welcome, getting to visit with students, getting to see the prairie, getting to see a bit of your beautiful city. So thank you. And I want more, oh, I guess I better stay right here, huh? Can't move too much. Let me do that. Put everything away here. There we go. I want, especially, as we always do, to begin with gratitude. Gratitude that when we all woke this morning and put our feet upon Mother Earth, there was sweet morning air to breathe, there was food to eat, there was water, there was companionship of birds and clouds and wind. How blessed we are. Gratitude for the companionship of one another and for attention that you have chosen to spend your time together this evening thinking about these very important issues. And gratitude for the first peoples of this place. I'm honored to be here in the country of the Omaha, the Ponca, the Santee, and the Winnebago. So in our way, miigwech for the care that you have given to this land. And it shows. Let me also bring you greetings in my language. I'm just a beginner in my language, but our teachers tell us that because it is an endangered species, that we should speak it whenever we have the chance to breathe life into that language. Our greeting in Potawatomi is Bojo. Bojo. Shabadaske gish kokwena deshnakas. Bodwe wadme kwenda. Megaze dodem min mamako dodem. Nin mami kwendam mampi ayan. And miigwech kinigeko kamijang. In our language, I told you that I'm a Potawatomi woman, a member of the Anishinaabe as well, a member of the Bear Clan, and then adopted into the Eagles as well. I'm very grateful to be here, and I come to you from my home, which is in the ancestral territory of the Onondaga Nation, up in Haudenosaunee territory, and I'm very grateful for the teachings and friendship of my friends there. The language that you just heard a little snippet of was the language of the Great Lakes, Anishinaabemowin. And what you see here in red is the historic territory of our Potawatomi people. We are part of the great confederacy of the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi. And this beautiful language just rippled along the shores of Lake Michigan, including in the name of that signal city of southern Lake Michigan, Chicagua. Maybe you've heard of it. It means the big field of wild onions. Now, you might think that having invited a plant ecologist here to speak to you tonight, an ESF scientist, that you would hear a science talk today filled with p-values and data. And gosh, I love data and p-values as much as the next scientist, but the kind of values that we're going to talk about tonight are different. We're talking about cultural values tonight. And one of the things that I treasure about being a scientist is the power of the tools that science gives us. But we also know that by its very nature, as a reductionist, purely rational mode of knowledge generation, that we privilege the mind and the body, right, in the way that we generate knowledge in science. Powerful tools. But we're told by our elders and by our teachings of the medicine wheel that every person has these four gifts. We have the gift of mind and body, but also of emotion and spirit. And science intrinsically leaves two of those out, right? We don't bring in our emotion or spirit to our scientific research. But you know, when we look at the sustainability issues that we face today, are they primarily issues of not enough information? Not enough data? Not so much. You know, they're really at the nexus of culture and land. And it is that's where we find values, right? And so because science by its very nature excludes values, it can't be the only tool that we use in environmental problem solving. And traditional ecological knowledge, as was mentioned earlier, explicitly incorporates all of these ways of knowing. And what I'd like to share with you tonight is some perspectives on bringing traditional ecological knowledge into the picture for environmental work, for our shared concerns for Mother Earth. And so instead of talking about data and p-values, not a single graph, I promise you, what we really need is the technology of story. So we're going to tonight talk about story. Once upon a time, the skies over our Potawatomi homelands would carry flocks of birds so vast that the skies were darkened by their numbers. Flocks that, as you know, could take days to pass over the Onondaga homelands, over the Huron, the Lenape, and perhaps over the homelands of your grandparents as well. Did you know that the flocks were so large that the collective weight of these birds would cause tree branches to fall to the forest floor? Huge flocks of these wonderful birds. And it was 102 years ago this fall, in September of 1914, that the last passenger pigeon passed from the earth. And her name was Martha, and she lived in the Cincinnati Zoo, alone. And in this time of accelerating species loss, you know that conservation biologists tell us that we are now in the age of the 6th extinction, no? And that the rate of species loss estimated today is 200 species every day. Every day. And so against that backdrop, the passage of Martha weighed heavily on my shoulders. And one of the things that I found is that I knew a lot more about how she became extinct than I did about how they lived. So I began reading, doing some research, consulting with my ornithology colleagues. And so I read about their vast numbers, their communal nesting, all wing to wing in those trees, and how they cherished a single egg in the nest. How they shaped the forests by their foraging on acorns and beech nuts, their dancing movement, and even the massive quantities of dung that built up underneath these roosts. So much dung that in fact it would ignite spontaneously, set the forest floor on fire, which is exactly what oak trees need in order to regenerate. So the abundance of the birds and the food that they used were linked in this quite remarkable way. How they came to settle like a distant wind into a grove of trees, and they had these wonderful voices that when they came together, they would talk to one another at night. And those voices linger in the name that our people have for them. And the name is Omimi. Omimi, in recognition of the music of their voices. I was also fascinated about the lives of Omimi and how they intersected actually with the lives of our Potawatomi ancestors. And the theory that the great abundance of Omimi, of the passenger pigeon, was actually a result of the depopulation of Native peoples. Because Native peoples had tended the land in such a way that it actually caused the massive increases in the number of these birds. And then when our people were lost to displacement and disease, the ecological stage was set for further population explosion of these birds. We also understood that in the Potawatomi way, the passenger pigeons were understood as flocks of departed souls. And today, our bird clan regalia in which we dance still is red and blue in the celebration of the colors of Omimi. And that one of the great chroniclers of the abundance of this beautiful bird was none other than Simon Pokagon, who was a Potawatomi leader and writer in the southern Great Lakes. And he described them in the flowery language of his time. I have stood by the grandest waterfall of America, he wrote, yet never have my astonishment, wonder, and admiration been so stirred as when I have witnessed these birds drop from their course like meteors from heaven. He was pretty impressed, and why not? And in Simon Pokagon's people, in their villages up there on the St. Joseph River in southern Michigan, was a chief was a leader named Sheshogin, who had a daughter whose name was Shanoda, the wind blowing through, and she was my many greats' great-grandmother. And Simon Pokagon's people lived in communal lodges next to one another, taking care of the oak forests, harvesting those acorns, just like Omimi did. They too set their lodges in communal circles. They too cherished a single offspring and would gather in the evening to sing together. The forest that the bird needed and the forest that the Potawatomi used, as you know, were wanted by other people for timber and for agriculture. And as the forests were cut and agriculture implemented in these areas, the forests dwindled. There were no more beech nuts and acorns to eat, and so what did the birds do? They turned to eating the crops, which got them labeled as pests. And when they were labeled as pests, the massive hunting began. You know this part of the story, I'm sure, about how they were killed by the thousands in nets and shotguns and all kinds of ingenious traps invented just for the slaughter of these birds, packed in barrels of salt, put on the train for the East Coast, where they were consumed both in fine restaurants and by the bucket load fed to pigs. This was in the same year that our people became fewer as well. And our Potawatomi people were canoe people until they made us walk. Our lodges were built on cold blue lakes under the birches and the aspens, ringing with the voices of loons. And we lived among our clan animals, who are our relatives and our teachers, the cranes, the wolf, and the moose. Our Potawatomi people were canoe people until they made us walk, until someone wanted that forest and we were marched away at gunpoint from all that we knew in the era of removal. And this is what we call the Trail of Death, as we are marched from the Great Lakes to Kansas. And I imagine the people, I think of my many greats grandmother, Shanoda, her hand trailing over the leaves of those beloved medicine plants as she left them behind. And did she look over her shoulder at the last tree, whispering a silent farewell to maples? We should ask them about climate change, because they lived it. What is it like to exchange a cool, lush forest for a hot, dusty grassland, lakes for dry riverbeds, baskets of wild rice for a sack of weevily flour? Loons, well, there is no replacement for loons. The animal teachers were all gone. The clans lost their meaning. How do you heal your family without the familiar medicines at your feet? What do you eat? The songs, the stories, even people's names. The man whose name was Light on the Snow lost their meaning. There were no reference points anymore. This was climate change. This is climate change. Climate change in a single season. So much loss. And shouldn't we too be looking over our shoulders and saying goodbye? Because as we know, climate change is one of the major drivers of that species loss of 200 species every single day. And when I found that photograph, this artistic photograph of Martha, the last passenger pigeon on her perch, I felt in that lonely gaze that you see here a lament, as if she's saying, how could something so beautiful, so ancient, so prolific simply vanish? What happened to the sound of their wings? Where did everybody go? What happened to the world that I used to know? And every time I looked at the photograph of Martha, I felt my great-grandmother's voice tugging at my sleeve. Born on the shores of Lake Michigan and buried on the windblown Kansas prairie, saying of her people and her culture, how could something so beautiful, so ancient, so prolific just vanish? Where did everybody go? What happened to the world that I used to know? Because as you see, the stories of our people and the stories of Omimi converge, don't they? Because both of them were swept away, or I should say attempted to be swept away by the same wind. And we know what happens when two great air masses, two winds meet, right? There's a lot of turbulence above, and oftentimes a lot of suffering below. And two winds met on this continent, two winds of worldviews. Worldviews that color our relationships with the living land that cares for us, which shape our answer to the question of what is it that land means. A worldview in which land is understood as our sustainer, as our library, as our identity, as our home, as sacred, as our pharmacy. A worldview in which all living beings are understood as persons, and that humans are just one member of the democracy of species, in which everyone gets a vote, people and passenger pigeons. And this view of what land means suddenly encountered another view, a kind of values climate change in the great wind sweeping across the continent. The whole notion of land as a set of relationships and responsibilities was replaced by the notion of land as a set of rights, rights to land as property, not rights of land, but rights to land as property, as capital, as natural resources. What native people called the gifts of the land became called the natural resources. Nature as family became nature as machine, and our non-human relatives that we regarded as our teachers became nothing more than objects for our consumption. And the whole question shifted from what does the earth ask of us to what more can we take from the earth? And this set of questions and these values may seem to have, oh, this happened in 1838. They're playing out in 2016, aren't they? They're playing out at Standing Rock. These are the questions that are at stake at Standing Rock. What does land mean? Is land sacred? Is land all of these other ways, or is land property capable of simply being exploited? The real questions that we are facing that have on the brink of climate chaos in the age of the sixth extinction is, what is land? Is it a source of belongings, or is it a source of belonging? That's the question we all face together. And the turbulence of this clash of worldviews spawned the wind that blew the Potawatomi to Kansas and propelled the extinction of the most abundant bird on earth. And we need to remember this heartbreak. We need to hear and remember this sad story, because it is the same wind that threatens to blow us all away today. And the temperature of that wind is rising. And you should also know that the story of Martha, the last passenger pigeon, and of my grandmother Shaw Noda are also foretold in the teachings of the Anishinaabe people, which are known as the prophecies of the people of the seventh fire. And I don't have time tonight to talk to you in detail about this. It would take days to really talk about all of the teachings that are associated with this. But I'll just tell you a fragment of it. And each of the fires of which I will speak refer to a historical era in the history of our people. And because in our way time moves in a circle, prophecy becomes history. History becomes prophecy. They are really inseparable from one another. And the story of the people of the seventh fire really begins way over on the Atlantic coast at the mouth of the St. Lawrence, where our people lived among our Wabanaki relatives. We were all there together long before the sails were seen in the east. And it was said that a teacher came among the people and said, big changes are coming to Turtle Island. And in order to safeguard the sacred fire, we shouldn't have all our eggs in one basket, as it were, and some of the people should move to the west. And so it was decided that some of the families would walk under the directive of go west until you come to where the food grows on the water, to the land of wild rice. And there you should make your homes, and that someday in the future the people would come back together again. And it was also foretold, this whole migration path of where we would stop and live for a time. This took generations for the people to move all the way out to the land of where the wild rice grows. But it was told that in each one of these fires there would be certain things that would happen. And in those fires it would talk about the time when newcomers came to Turtle Island. And we know that has come to pass. And we also, in these stories, it would be told the time will be that the people will be separated from their homelands. They'll have to make long walks. And we know that that came to pass. That the language would be lost. That new religions would come among the people and try to break the sacred hoop of the people. It was said that there would come a time when you could no longer dip your cup into the stream and drink. There would come a time when the air was too thick to breathe. And that there would come a time when the plants and animals, our relatives, would start to turn their faces away from us. And we know that that too has come to pass, that that is the time in which we live. These are the teachings of the seventh fire. But it's told that in the time of the seventh fire, all of the world's peoples, the original peoples and the Zaganash, the newcomers, would stand together at a fork in the road. And when we think about that fork in the road, this decision that needs to be made about how it is that we will live here on the earth, that in my imagination anyway, one of those paths is so soft and green and all spangled with dew, you would want to take your shoes off and walk barefoot there. We know that's the path we want. And the other path is black and burnt, and it's all made of cinders that would cut your feet. And we're told that we all stand there and have to make a choice. But what the prophecies of the seventh fire tell us is that we can't just go bounding down that green path. Not yet. In fact, what they say is that what we have to do, all of us together, is turn around and walk backward. Walk backward along the ancestors' path and pick up all of those things that had been dropped along the way. To pick up the fragments of land and stories, to pick up the teachings, to pick up a worldview of belonging to land, that to pick up the ceremonies, to pick up our plant and animal relatives. And after we have done that and put them in our bundles, then we can go together and walk down that green path. And when we choose this life-affirming path, which is imbued with mind, body, emotion, and spirit, all of those ways, then we can walk forward and light the eighth and final fire. And our elders tell us that this eighth and final fire is the one that will endure. And they tell us that we are the seventh fire people, that we're the ones who stand at that crossroads, and that it's incredibly difficult work of reweaving the world, but that that is our responsibility as seventh fire people. It's a hard story, but also a hopeful story, that that work is there to be done, and that if we go pick back up those things that the land has taught us throughout history, then we'll be able to light that eighth fire. And one of the things, of course, that we need to pick up along that pathway is traditional ecological knowledge. And that's really what I want to spend the rest of my time talking about, is what are those things that we might pick up along the way. Now, I'm going to assume that because there are very, very few places where you can study traditional ecological knowledge in a university setting, that most of you are not familiar with this. So let's just take a quick look at what we mean by TEK, or traditional ecological knowledge. And oftentimes we think about it as just this, as the local knowledge of plants and animals. It's land knowledge, empirically derived experience on the land that brings us great understanding about the land. But as you see, it's also embedded in how we care for the land, in the land management practices, which are embedded in social institutions of how we organize ourselves and think of ourselves, which are embedded in the worldview. So the worldview that we talked about a few moments ago is as integral to thinking about TEK. It's the philosophical constructs that in which the empirical knowledge of the land is really embedded. One of the things that's important to note is when you say traditional ecological knowledge, it sounds like a museum piece, like, you know, it's what we used to do. But it isn't. It is, in fact, some people say, a lot of Native scholars say, we should call it naturalized knowledge, because this is knowledge which is constantly evolving. It's adaptive knowledge. It's the knowledge that lets you survive relocation and removal and the climate change that was associated with that. It's dynamic knowledge. And that this is knowledge that doesn't come with a chromosome. This is knowledge which is shared with people who pay attention to land, So this is land, this is knowledge which is held by the land and shared with the people. So I think about traditional knowledge in the most simple way, is it is the way we enact reciprocity with the land. As the land gives to us and sustains us, we use traditional ecological knowledge to in turn sustain the land. And I'm very fortunate, where I live in central New York, to sit at the confluence of two great intellectual traditions of traditional ecological knowledge represented by the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, on whose homelands I live, and the SEK of the university where I work. SEK was an important term, I think, to bring up there, because we often hear, well, we have TEK and we have science. Like science is the valid kind of knowledge, and we have TEK. So I like to call science SEK. It's scientific ecological knowledge. There are multiple ways of knowing, and we need to understand both of them. But you know what? You too sit at a confluence of knowledge systems here, don't you, in Nebraska, between the knowledge of the First Peoples here and the knowledge of the university. And certainly at my university, there was very little conversation between these two ways of knowing. And the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment was really born out of that conversation, that beginning conversation of how could we use these splendid tools for caring for Mother Earth and bring them together in an important way. And it's really important that we do this, of course, because let's just step back for a second. We're really talking about evolution here. I would submit to you that if we are going to arrest also species loss of 200 species every single day, that we need cultural evolution. Right? We need to live differently. We need to conceive of ourselves differently. And what is it that drives evolution? We all learn in Bio 101 what it is that drives biological evolution. It's genetic diversity, right? We all know that. So, and what is it that drives cultural evolution? An element of it is intellectual diversity, cultural diversity. And so we need all of these ideas on the table. For too long, traditional ecological knowledge has been dismissed as folklore and marginalized from the academy, and our work is to bring it back. And the model that we try to use, at least in our institution, is a model taught to us by the great intelligence of the plants and the way that Native peoples used them. You're looking here at a Three Sisters garden, right? I think you're all familiar with that kind of polyculture in which corn, beans, and squash are all grown together. And they help each other. They don't compete with one another, do they? They help each other out. They're complementary. And does the corn become the beans when they grow together? Of course not. Beans don't become the squash. They maintain their individuality, their sovereignty, but they work together. And we like to take this metaphor of the Three Sisters garden and think about how do we plant a knowledge garden that looks something like that, where the traditional knowledge isn't subsumed by science. They keep their individuality, they work together. And so we really are imagining what would it be like to have a knowledge symbiosis where the powerful tools of Western science are guided by the indigenous worldview toward conservation and sustainability. That's what we're reaching for. That's the great experiment that we're doing. And so when we talk about the realms of traditional ecological knowledge, just a little whirlwind tour about what we're talking about. We're talking about agricultural knowledge, right? Like the example of the, Dan Wildcat's term of the indigenuity of the Three Sisters garden, agricultural knowledge, certainly pharmaceutical knowledge of medicine plants, which is very deep, knowledge of wildlife and fish population dynamics that in many cases rivals and in documented cases exceeds what wildlife biologists understand. And let's not forget that the first red flag about climate change was raised by Inuit people who knew so much about their Bering Sea food chains that they could say, something is amiss here. Something is amiss because all these warm water fishes are here that should not be here. But we didn't listen. Another story of what is traditional knowledge comes from just a tiny anecdote here of some work that was done in South America to differentiate traditional knowledge from what was called folklore. The folklore was that the Quechua-speaking peoples would go to a certain mountain on a certain day, and the elders would go there and they would ask the stars what they should plant that year. And then they would listen and they'd go plant that. And this was widely dismissed as nonsense, right? Not really validatable. The stars aren't going to tell you what to plant. Well, it turns out, of course, that what was happening is these were very skilled observers going to exactly the same place on the same calendar day of the year, looking at the Pleiades, that cluster of 7 stars that vary in brightness. And they were looking and comparing the brightness of those stars. And it turns out that the brightness of those stars varies with the density of ice crystals in the stratosphere, which varies with the temperature of the South Pacific, which varies in what we call the Southern Oscillation, also known as El Nino. They were predicting El Nino years long before Western science even knew that that oscillation existed, and were adjusting their agricultural strategies on an annual basis. That's the predictive power of traditional ecological knowledge and the kind of sophisticated observations that are linked from the stars to the soil. Traditional knowledge is, as I said, not a museum piece. Traditional knowledge is of vital importance for us in conservation and a resilience in a time of change, particularly in a time of climate change. I want to give you just a few examples. We think about as desertification as one of the large impacts of climate change. So can we rely on our relatives from the Southwest who have devised the remarkable forms of dryland farming to lead us to sustainable agriculture? Knowledge of alternative food plants. We eat so few plants. We eat basically 10 plants, folks, and there are 250,000 out there to choose from that are eaten by native peoples all over the world as a way of supplementing our diets. This shot is to remind us of the power of traditional land management. What you're looking at here are some beautiful tall grass prairies of some of the easternmost distribution of them. This is at Walpole Island First Nation, Bequejiwinong. Bequejiwinong has the highest tall grass prairie biodiversity on the planet. Botanists, ecologists go there all the time to study what a real tall grass prairie ought to look like. Why does it look so good? Because this is the home of 3 Fires people who have an uninterrupted history of annual fall birding of these tall grass prairies. The traditional management regime has never been interrupted and has been a powerful generator of biodiversity. As we think about land management and conservation strategies, oughtn't we to be thinking about the traditional tending practices that in many cases generated and protected biodiversity? There are models all over the country, often models that are not celebrated, receive much attention, like the amazing forests of the Menominee Nation of northern Wisconsin, who have been using traditional ecological knowledge to manage their forests for centuries. When you go to that forest, it looks like an old-growth forest. Yet they are taking so much timber out of that forest that they can sustain their entire tribal population. They've cut that forest over 4 times, and there's more timber on it now than when they started. This is traditional knowledge in action as a model for sustainability. Yet how many forestry courses study Menominee forestry and the teachings of Chief Oshkosh? Not too many. What about the Fish and Wildlife Service working in tandem with Nez Perce people, using traditional knowledge and traditional wolf stories to restore the wolf to Idaho? What about the fact that by using treaty rights and traditional knowledge and traditional responsibilities to the salmon, that the Columbia River tribes are really leading watershed restoration in the Pacific Northwest against all odds to care for their salmon relatives, led by amazing scientists and leaders like Billy Frank. In my own territory, what you're looking at there is Onondaga Lake, the sacred lake of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the place where democracy was modeled, the place where the great law of peace was delivered, is also the home of 13 different Superfund sites, the most contaminated lake in North America. And the Onondaga Nation has put forward their vision based on traditional knowledge of what that lake ought to be as a partner to the scientific tools of restoration. This is what I'm talking about, of how traditional knowledge can be used as a guide and an inspiration for doing our work. I want to take a minute and have you look at this map for a second, which might be familiar to those of you in the conservation community because it's a map of biodiversity hotspots. You've probably seen this from World Wildlife, from the Nature Conservancy, IUCN, very famous map showing all of the places that are super species rich. And overlain onto that map of species biodiversity is a map of language diversity and cultural diversity. And they map almost one for one. Isn't that interesting? Why should that be? We could talk all night about that, but just a glimpse of this. Why is linguistic and cultural diversity associated with hotbeds of biodiversity? In large part because of the caretaking practices of people for that land, the respect that they have for the plants and animals around them, and it is held in language. Language as a window for how it is that we see and interact with the world. A tiny story about that. You're looking here at the endangered species, the desert tortoise, a species that was so endangered that the fish and wildlife biologists who were designated to create critical habitat for it weren't even sure exactly what it needed to survive, which pieces of land should be designated for its protection. And my friend Gary Nabhan, whose writings you probably know, a wonderful ethnobotanist and writer and conservation biologist, was working with them on this trying to find the right habitat for the desert tortoise. And he brought along a friend of his who was a Tohono O'odham herbalist. And she didn't speak much English, and she was pretty quiet on most of the field trips as they got in and out of the truck, driving to this place and driving to that place, assessing its habitat suitability, until they came to a particular valley. And they were saying, well, yeah, maybe, I don't know. And she pointed to this plant that was abundant in the bottom of that valley floor. And she spoke in her language, and she told them the name of that plant. And the name of the plant was Desert Tortoise Eats It. Linguistic diversity, biodiversity. You know where the desert tortoise reserves are now. So just a quick commentary on this. Preservation and revitalization of indigenous languages is not something that we often think of as a conservation biology tool, but I hope you're getting a glimpse of how very important it is. And one of the important elements of this, not just in the vocabulary, but in the whole way languages are structured, is in my own struggle to learn Anishinaabe-Moan, the Potawatomi language. One of the real challenges of learning this language is that it's all verbs, 70% verbs, and that those verbs have different cases, not for gender, as in some of the Romance languages, but for animacy and inanimacy. You hear an airplane with a completely different verb than you hear a blue jay, because one is animate and one is inanimate. So we speak a grammar of animacy, such that, if I said of Dr. Hubbard, it's sitting in the front row. Is that okay? Would that be okay if I said that it is sitting in the front row? If your grandma was standing by the stove cooking soup for you, and you say, oh, it's wearing an apron? No, we don't do that. We don't do that, right? Because it would be so disrespectful to say of our relative, I would rob you of your personhood, right? But in English, how do we speak of maple trees, geese, rivers? It's all it, isn't it? Isn't it? Yeah, we do not speak a grammar of animacy. And in English, the very fact that we have a special grammar for humans reinforces human exceptionalism, doesn't it? That we are somehow more entitled to the gifts of the earth than any other species. That we're somehow different and more special, as opposed to being a member of the democracy of species. And this very notion, captured in many indigenous languages, of the essential qualities of all living beings recognized as persons, is an essential difference. And so I've been doing a little word experiment, of a modest proposal of transforming the English language and our relationship to nature with a couple of pronouns. Who thought that grammar could matter? But what if? Have you ever felt unsettled by calling the natural world it? Yeah? You know, as a student of the mosses, I've spent decades on my knees among the mosses. It hurts me to call them it. They're not it. They're my teachers. They're my companions. But English imprisons us. We can only say it. And so I asked my language teachers and elders about, could we think about a way to infuse animacy into the English language? And if so, what would that word be? Well, can we find a word that we can slip in along he, she, it, and something else that means a being, an animate being, not a thing, but a being of the earth? And there is in our language a beautiful word called bemadazi aki, which means an earth being. But I'm pretty sure that we can't slip bemadazi aki into the English language. And so one of the things we've been talking about is think about that last word, aki, means the earth. Can we use that last syllable, ki, to sit beside he, she, and it, so that instead of when we go and tap the maples, the anemone in the springtime, instead of saying I'm going to, go drill a hole in it, we say I'm going to ask Ki if she will share her gift with me. So animating our language, and of course we'd need a plural for that too. And in English we already have it. We already have a beautiful word for that. Imagine. Every time we spoke of the natural world, we spoke with respect for the animacy and the personhood of those geese flying overhead or the trees that are around us. Conservation biology in indigenous languages and pronouns. There we go, we're right on time. How about that? And so with the advent of tools of molecular biology, you've probably heard that there is a movement afoot to de-extinct species like the passenger pigeon, to use Martha's DNA to recreate her in the lab. It's a lot of interest in doing this. Mastodons too, right? Out in here, you probably hear about that a lot. But I would ask us, didn't Martha's loneliness teach us anything? That a species is so much more than its genotype, and so much more than its genome. And it would really just be an exercise in loneliness. But if there's anything that we should be investing our energies of de-extinction, let it be to de-extinction of a worldview. Because against all odds, unlike our sister species, Omimi, our people are not extinct. Our people are not extinct, despite the trail of death, despite tremendous losses. They carried something with them that allowed them to endure through great climate change, great upheaval, resilient in the face of all odds. To be resilient, maybe we ought to be thinking about what that was. What are the tools of resilience in a rapidly changing world? And some of our elders say that the reason that traditional ecological knowledge has been held by our people for so long against all odds, it's really a miracle that the fragments exist at all, is because one day the whole rest of the world would need it at that point when we stand at the fork in the road of the seventh fire. And if we think about walking back along that ancestor path to pick up what was left behind, that we could have cultural evolution toward a livable planet and just human communities, what would it be? what might be some of the most valuable resources from traditional knowledge that are resources for resilience and conservation. The one that I want to share with you in closing is a group of ways of being, both practical and philosophical, both material and spiritual, because in traditional ways of thinking, we let those dance with each other rather than banishing one to the corner, the way we do in Western science. And this is a group of teachings that have been shared with me as a botanist by plant gatherers, berry pickers, nut gatherers, plant medicine harvesters, and is a synthesis of many of the things that I have been really blessed to learn from native harvesters. And it goes something like this. If we really take animacy seriously, if we really take seriously that all of the other beings around us are persons, how do we consume them? It sets up an ethical dilemma, doesn't it? Of how do you consume your relatives? But that's the way the world works. We're heterotrophs, right? None of us can photosynthesize. We have to eat. And when we think about the other beings as persons, that means the way that we take from the world has to be honorable. Because it's not just stuff. It's our relatives who are giving their lives to us so that we can live. How do we do that with honor? And so, in plant harvesting, if we're going to go pick berries, and we just go into the meadow, do we just start picking berries? Do we just start grabbing and filling our buckets as fast as we can? We do not. What I've always been told is that you never take the first one. You look around you, you appreciate, you never take the first one. And that self-restraint means you're not ever going to take the last one, right? And then you look around and you see how many there are. Different cultures, different practitioners have different numbers that they'll say, only take if there are 4, only take if there are 7. There are lots of different prescriptions of self-restraint. But before you take, you ask permission. You greet that plant and you tell it your name and you say what you're there for, that your daughter has a cough and you need some of that root. And you ask that plant, could I have some of that root? Could you share with me in order that your gift could help my daughter's cough go away? You ask permission. Think about it this way. If that sounds crazy to you, if you came into a strawberry-filled meadow and found someone talking to the plants, you might think she was crazy, but in our way, it's just good manners. It's just good manners. Because would you go into your grandmother's house and start rifling through her cupboards to get the cookies? I see some guilty faces out there. You might do it once, right? Just once. But isn't that what we do with our beloved grandmother Earth? We just take what we want. We need to ask permission. We need to ask permission. And if you're going to ask permission, you have to listen for the answer. And it might be no. But more often than not, it's yes, because they have gifts to share with us. They're generous beings. You have to listen for the answer. And science is a great way of listening to the answer, of doing species monitoring and species inventory. Is there enough to share? Is this population thrifty and healthy? That's a great way to listen for the answer. There are also the intuitive ways to listen to the answer from those plants, of whether they're willing to share with you. But think about it. We're also told to always take only that which we need. No more than that, which is why when you introduce yourself, you say what you need it for. I need it for this. So that sets some limits on what it is that you're going to take. And take in such a way that minimizes harm. The teaching that was given me is don't use a shovel if a digging stick will do. That kind of rules out bulldozers. Minimize harm. Take in such a way that is appropriate to your task, and only that. To Omimi. Was Omimi harvested by native people throughout its range? Yes, they were. Yes, they were. In their tremendous abundance, these birds were hunted. And Simon Pokagon describes his horror at the way the birds were harvested by the settlers and the colonists. And he said, well, the way that we harvest them is only in the spring, and we only take the young ones. They nest really early in the year, and so when those squabs would be big enough to leave the nest, that's what they would harvest. That's who they would harvest, is those young ones. And it turns out that the passenger pigeons, if they lost their nestlings early in the spring, they would re-nest. There was time in the season for them to re-nest. And so their population numbers remained stable, and the people got to eat at the same time. And they were harvested honorably through these protocols. And in fact, in the longhouses of my Haudenosaunee neighbors, they still do the pigeon dance, which is a dance of gratitude for the birds for feeding the people, the giving them the gift of this life. Even though the pigeons are gone, they still do that dance as a reminder of what happens when we fail to be grateful and fail to pay attention. So back to the honorable harvest. The honorable harvest continues that use everything that you take, because when a life is given to you, it is so dishonorable to waste it. And of course, we have really forgotten that the easiest way to have everything that we need is not to waste what we have. So this is an important teaching. And be grateful for what has been given to us. And gratitude might seem like really weak tea, given a species loss that we face, given climate chaos. But gratitude is a really powerful emotion and a powerful motivator. Gratitude reminds us that someone else has given their life for us, that we can live. It reminds us of our interconnection. And when we're grateful, when someone gives us a gift and we say thank you, what do we do next? You say you're welcome. And if you've given me a birthday gift, when your birthday comes around, I'm going to give you a gift. We reciprocate, right? Gratitude opens the door to reciprocity. And indeed, the next teaching in the honorable harvest is to share what you've taken and to reciprocate the gift, that you always give a gift back. Sometimes, traditionally, it will be a ceremonial gift of putting down tobacco, which for us is a sacred plant, is a sacred gift. But sometimes it's a song. You give a song to that plant, or sometimes it's a very practical thing of weeding around the plant that you just harvested from, or taking those seeds and carrying them to another place and planting them. You reciprocate the gift. The plant has given to you, so you give back to the plant. And so the world keeps going through reciprocity. We're also told that the even older harvest guidelines are take only that which is given to you. All these other guidelines to me are really quite doable, and they're part of my own practice, and probably part of yours too. But this notion of take only that which is given is, for me, a bit of a harder philosophical construct. How do we know what's given to us? Berries are easy. They are given to us, aren't they? I mean, the plant is dangling these little packages of sweetness right before us. They want us to take them, right? In fact, did you know, in our language, the word for gift, min, is the same as the word for berry. The berries are gifts to the people. And so we take those gifts, and do we reciprocate? Sure we do, by spreading their seeds, right? That's why they want us to take those delicious berries so we can propagate them. And it turns out for a lot of berry plants, the act of picking is a kind of pruning that shifts the apical dominance and the hormone regimes in the plants so that they make more berries the next year. So this is good, this is mutualism. So those kinds of take only that which is given, that makes sense to me. But some of it I'm still puzzling over. But I feel really darn sure that coal from mountaintop removal is not given to us. I don't think that tar sands oil is given to us, given the damage that we must inflict in order to, I won't say receive that gift, in order to take that from the earth. So what I like to think about is that renewables, the sun shines every day. Is that given to us? The waves roll every day, the wind blows every day, that's given to us. Not without its cost, but given to us. And so this honorable harvest that you might look at and say, well, that's a kind of a quaint protocol for picking berries. It's a lot more than that, isn't it? It is a very sophisticated mechanism for thinking about how it is that we, as a heterotrophic species, take from the earth. What if we used the honorable harvest as our guidelines for sustainable energy policy? What if we used the honorable harvest before we plow up a virgin prairie for a parking lot? What do you suppose would happen if we had to ask permission of the meadowlarks first? It's a restraint, isn't it? What we're looking at here is an ancient and urgent protocol for conservation. And to finish up, I worked for a time and continue to work in the field of restoration ecology, of healing ecosystems, like Onondaga Lake. But what I came to realize is that it's not just the land that's broken. It's our relationship to land that's broken. And traditional ecological knowledge is as much about healing relationship as it is about healing the land itself. Science can be a really great tool for ecosystem restoration, but by the simple fact that it excludes values, emotion, and spirit, it is not the tool for healing relationship to place. And this is one of the great strengths of traditional ecological knowledge, in using all of those ways of knowing to heal our relationship to place, so that we can once again engage in the honorable harvest, so that we as humans can once again view ourselves as givers to the earth, not just as consumers to the earth, but as being part of the covenant of reciprocity. And I think that had we adopted the wisdom of the honorable harvest, instead of marching it away to wither in the dry lands of Kansas, we might this very spring have looked up to see flocks of omimi passing by us like a living wind. Mi'u, miigwech. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. And do we have time for a few questions? Is that the plan? Yeah, I'd be happy to take a few questions. Or thoughts, or comments, or songs. Yes.
And we'll ask that you just wait until Madeline comes to you with the microphone because we're filming. Okay, do I have to stand up too? Okay.
If I do, you do.
You talked me into it. Okay. My name is Sloan Cornelius. I'm Oglala Lakota. My people are from Pine Ridge Reservation. I grew up around here, south of here by Beatrice. I stood up really fast. Hold on, let me catch my breath. Okay. I am a youth assistant. I'm also an activist, and so I work a lot with kids. My question is, with our traditional knowledge, what I see happening is it become commodified by non-Native people. And so then our traditional knowledge, non-Native people have more access to our traditional knowledge than, say, we do. And so how can we as Native people equalize the playing field so that, like, I'm here, I can take this back to my kids where I work, but I don't see anybody that I know here, you know? So how can I equalize the playing field and make sure that our knowledge belongs to us first and that we also have access to it and don't become alienated from it in the process?
It's a powerful question. Thank you for asking it.
Good luck.
Well, really, yeah. And I think that one of the things that has been very important, and somebody said at the outset that traditional knowledge is receiving more and more attention for its power in all of these realms, but what becomes really important is that the sovereignty of that knowledge that is embedded in communities, that knowledge shouldn't really be separated from communities, right? And that Native peoples need to have the control over that knowledge, because it certain, we know that biopiracy goes on all over the world, cultural appropriation, and so in many cases it seems like your work with youth, strengthening our own, do I want to say, I was going to use the word ownership, but I mean that in a broader way, that strengthening of identity and strengthening the way that we use that knowledge is a powerful tool against commodification, but the power differential is extreme. And one of the things that we work a lot within our center is thinking about this question of what are the elements of traditional knowledge that should be held very closely, and what are the elements that can be shared. And as you notice here, we share philosophy, but not necessarily details. And one of the things that's really important is also that for these kinds of relationships to work, for settler society to use these tools, they have to come from the heart. They have to come from authentic relationship with place, not be borrowed. And what I'm seeing in many places is this liberation of loving the land, of saying, well, I love this land feeds me, this land is the place that I drink from, and I owe reciprocity to this land. And so the honorable harvest emerges from that, from settlers as well as Native people. So thank you for that really good question. That's a hard answer. Yeah. Other thoughts or questions?
Hi, my name is Brittany. I'm a graduate student here at the university in the Department of Agronomy and Horticulture. And I was just wondering, do you know of any global repositories of traditional ecological knowledge? I guess it kind of surprised me that the last person said that they weren't sure if, their own people knew all of their traditional knowledge. And I was thinking about peoples that don't necessarily have communities because they're so broken and lost that how is there a way to, or is someone collecting that knowledge somewhere? Is there like a global repository where everyone could look at what everyone knows? If you know of anything like that that's going on.
There are many efforts at, I guess you would say, documenting and revitalizing traditional knowledge. But the most successful and really, I think, culturally appropriate ones are at the local scale, within nations, within communities, where they have the role of protecting and safeguarding that knowledge and being sure that the knowledge which is in such a repository is the knowledge that they want to have there. I don't know of any global repositories. India has done a great job. They have what do they call it? I think it's the plant knowledge bioregistry in India that they have been using to safeguard their knowledge and to document it. And that really came about after cases of biopiracy, where companies would come in, like the neem tree controversy that you probably know about, where somebody came in to try to patent the neem tree, which is part of their traditional medicine, traditional life ways from time immemorial. And a Western company came in to try to use it and commodify it. And so the bioregistry came about as a way of protecting it, to be able to say, no, this is our knowledge. This is not your knowledge, whatever. I don't remember what the pharmaceutical company was. So there are some international registries of traditional knowledge, but most of those with which I'm familiar are community and nation-based. Does somebody have something else to say about that? More knowledgeable about that?
It would definitely be a tremendous amount of work, so it doesn't surprise me that there's not a whole lot.
Yeah, and it's just as antithetical to the nature of traditional knowledge, which is so embedded in culture and in place and in locality and in language and practice. To abstract it and put it in a repository of some kind would cross worldviews. It would make the animacy of traditional knowledge into a thing, and all the risks that come along with that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes. I think it's coming to you.
Hi, Hi, I'm Ania Kusels. I'm a student at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I'm an anthropology major and potentially soon to be environmental studies major, hopefully. I guess this isn't a question, it's more of a comment or announcement on something you said. You mentioned the fight that's going on up at Standing Rock, and I just wanted to make it known to everyone in this room. Even if it feels like you can't always do something to help on a larger scale, there is a protest, or not protest, a march going on this Saturday at 12 p.m. in front of the Capitol building that's being organized by people who have been up there and by myself and other people who have been up there who are in support of the movement. And it would be wonderful to see any of you in this room who are here to support, sustainability, Native peoples of this land. And it would be wonderful to see you up there to actually support them in person. So, thank you. If you have a comment on that, then please.
My comment is thank you. Yeah, I'm so glad you're doing that, because this is a movement which is at the heart in Indian country and in everybody who's coming together at Standing Rock, including allies from all kinds of communities, all walks of life, because water takes care of all of us. Yeah. There's a couple in the back.
Hi, I'm Phyllis Stone. I am Lakota, Sichangu Lakota, and I wanted to make a small comment about the Standing Rock. It's not just for Indian people. This is for everybody. The Indian people have just chosen to put ourselves in front of all of this, because water is very important to us. And I really feel that our Sundance ceremony is one of the reasons why it is so very important. We give up water for a good 5 days. We don't touch water. We don't drink water. We have nothing to do with water. And we know how important that is. I mean, if you do that for several years, and you need to pledge for 4 years of doing that, it gets to become, you realize water is very important, very, very important, and it's not just important to Indian people. It's important to everybody. And I wanted to make a quick comment to simplify when they came in to try to take the Ming tree and make it, patent it, it's very much like that person. And I'm sorry, I don't remember people's names if I don't like them.
Probably a good thing.
Anyway, this man, this Washichu, comes into our country and he finds pipestone. The Indian people, the Lakota people, have always known pipestone. But this man found it and chose to name it after himself. There, yes. I just thought that was a very simple thing, to name something after yourself.
Thank you. Thank you for those wise words. And in fact, one of the greatest examples of that kind of linguistic imperialism of renaming things is, I think, the notion of it. To say of our relatives that we're not going to call them our relatives anymore, that we have to call them it. So there's so many examples of that we need to reclaim. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kaylee. I'm a Doctor of Plant Health student and a graduate student in agronomy and horticulture. I've always been fascinated with plants. Fun story. and I can't seem to run away from them no matter how hard I try. But I also love people, and that's something that I appreciated about what you spoke about. And it's been a concept I've been trying to struggle with for a while, back and forth, as both somebody that's people-oriented and cares greatly about relationships between people, but then also cares greatly about science and plants and how that affects our world. And I guess my question is, how do we take, and as someone that's from multiple cultural backgrounds, how do you get these things to cross, these concepts to cross cultural boundaries and bring people together instead of divide them more, and get people to see how, just like you're talking about, integrating science with thoughts and both emotion and spirit, because I think that's very important. How do you not only teach that to younger generations, but how do you do that to bring people together and to bring people together to better the world, both scientifically and culturally together? Like, what are some practical ways, I guess?
That's a big question. I think that a piece of the answer that I would like to give is that when I'm faced with a weighty question like that seems unanswerable because of all of its dimensions, I try to turn to intelligences far greater than my own. And that is, I go to the natural world and understand that the nature, natural intelligence of the landscape, of the plant beings, of the water beings, of the animal beings, that they all have a lot more to say about that than I do. And I think that one of the most powerful ways to heal this relationship is time spent on the land, because it's the land that's the teacher. And when we isolate ourselves indoors all the time with our digital distractions and all the other things that we use to separate ourselves, we cut ourselves off from the teachers, the ones who can tell us, how do these things cross cultures? How do they cross cultures? Because the plants will give you their lessons if you pay attention. It doesn't matter who you are. They're going to, if you ask, if you pay attention, they're going to teach you too. They'll teach everybody. So I think time on the land is the most important thing. And when we know that we live in a society which is plagued by nature deficit disorder, but the medicine is in the land, and it's reconnecting with the land, and that's where we'll learn how to do this, because the land feeds all of us. When you're on the land, you can't help but know these things, and know that you don't have a bigger piece, that the land doesn't feed you better than it feeds somebody else, so it heals the relationship among people as well. So I think we have to just spend more time on the land. Put your hands in the earth is a piece of it. So
I think with that,
thank you.